one interesting thing that I noticed in your explanation is that you don't yet use a lot of economic concepts, and this ties into a question that I have. Like, why do you think that we as economists hardly discuss resilience? It's not really on our radar too much, is it?
The problem is that we just simply assume it. So in most of our models, we have, so I'm going a little bit more technical here, we assume that we live in models which have a stationary distribution. So essentially when there's a shock, you come back automatically. So it's not analyzed, it's just assumed that we will come back. If we will not come back, then we have a degenerated distribution. So you just get a shock and then you can't come back from that. And we typically rule this out. So we essentially, by assumption, we said, oh, everything is bouncing back. But I think it's much a deeper concept. So we have to understand, when do you bounce back? How quickly does it take to bounce back, and all these things. And I think there's a rich literature to evolve to study more resilience. And also, people have not studied really the contrast more to robustness.
Right. So this is, for example, something that is indeed the case in macroeconomic models, right? Then, they model a macroeconomy and they look at something like GDP, which finds a steady state at some point, but then they study sort of outside shocks, and then the assumption is that the model returns to that steady state.
That's correct.
Right? Yeah.
And if you have a model, it turns out that you would not return to steady state. You would throw it out of the window. So you would say, oh, that's not a well-specified model.
Right. Oh, yeah. Okay. And so this maybe relates to, this is one of the examples that you use in your book, that what we actually see in many macroeconomies is that we might get hit by a very big crisis, but then we don't return to the steady state that we had before, the growth path. For example, Europe is a very well-known example, right? Like, we were hit by the global financial crisis, we were growing before, and then we sort of permanently grew slower afterwards. Is that true?
Yes, that's true. So in particular, if you have a financial crisis, you see it in the Euro crisis, but you also see it in the US of the global financial crisis, but most strikingly probably in Japan, where you see, whenever there was a financial crisis, then actually the growth rate is going down and actually level. So the level drops off and the growth rate subsequently is coming back down as well. So you don't go back to the old growth path. And that's very different from shocks, which are exogenous shocks like an earthquake or Fukushima. You bounce back very quickly. So that's very striking in a sense that financial crises typically make it much harder to bounce back.